I think we're about ready to start. We've got well over 100 people in the room with us this evening, which is a marvellous turnout. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, everybody, and welcome to the March Macula and Me Macular Society webinar. My name is Cathy Yelf and I'm the Chief Executive of the Macular Society, and as I say, it's absolutely fantastic to see so many people on the webinar this evening. Now, we'll crack on straight away. We have an hour with our special guest today. And you may remember back in January, there was a bit of what's called a media storm over a new invention that was dubbed, of course, the Bionic eye. Now, the story was that an 88-year-old woman with macular degeneration had become the first person in the UK to have an innovative new eye implant that could help her to see better. She's one of around 30 people across Europe who are being recruited into a trial to test this new implant. It's called the Prima system. Now, as I said, there was quite a lot of excitement about this. The surgeon who implanted the device and who is leading the trial in the UK, I'm delighted to say, is my guest here this evening. He is Mahi Muqit, who is a consultant vitreoretinal surgeon at Moorfields Eye Hospital. And he's also an honorary clinical lecturer at the Institute of Ophthalmology at the University College London, which is very close, sits very close to Moorfields Hospital. Now, Mahi is a specialist in many retinal diseases, including diabetic retinopathy and macular degeneration. And he's, as a result, a chief investigator in a range of clinical trials that are run from the Moorfields Biomedical Research Centre. He also works, and this is a very interesting part of his working makeup, but he works as a volunteer consultant for the Helen Keller International, which is a non-governmental organisation that works in developing countries to improve eye care. And he's currently involved there with a number of innovative diabetic retinopathy screening projects based mainly in Southeast Asia, where of course we know there is a very large diabetic public health issue. But tonight, he's here to talk to us about the Bionic eye. Now, as ever, there will be time for questions at the end of Mahi's talk, so please use the chat function, which you should see at the bottom of your screen. If you could put your questions into there, and as we always do, we'll try to cover as many as we possibly can. This is a really fascinating topic. Mahi, a very warm welcome to Macula and Me. Thank you so much for joining us and giving up your time for us this evening. I'm going to hand over to you now to listen to your talk. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Cathy. Thank you, Macular Society, for this very kind invitation. So I'm just going to share my screen. So I'm just going to bring this here. So yes, I'm going to speak about this new retinal chip called Prima, which is known as a part of a bionic vision system for patients with dry age-related macular degeneration, particularly geographic atrophy. So thank you again for this kind invitation. So if you look back over the last 50 years, retinal implants started at a very rudimentary level with electrodes being passed around the patient's head to stimulate vision. People implanted chips around the skull and the brain, again, to try and produce some kind of visual stimulus. This then moved on to other types of devices for particularly retinitis pigmentosa by certain companies. And these retinal chips have been extensively studied, especially for retinitis pigmentosa. However, the results weren't fantastic. And these chips aren't really being used currently for patients. But as you can see, what I'm showing here is a picture of a retinal chip. And what you can see is that the size of the chip is getting smaller and smaller over the last 50 years. And the chip I'm going to be speaking about today, the Prima, is laid out on a €1 coin and it's very, very small as it lies on the surface. So it's a miniaturized chip, which we're now using. This slide shows a color picture and a black and white picture of a patient who has age-related macular degeneration with geographic atrophy. So the central part of the retina, known as the macula, as you know, has degenerated to leave a large gap. And I'm also showing an OCT scan, which is a photographic scan of the eye, which shows the area in the central part of the macula that's missing the photoreceptors. So taking a step back and studying this new retinal chip called Prima, it's based on photovoltaics. So the science behind photovoltaics is all around us. We see them when we're overseas, and if we venture into the desert, very hot climates, and you'll see solar panels lying across the desert. And these solar panels are using the sun's energy to convert into electrical energy to generate heat and electricity. And the Prima implant is a photovoltaic cell. However, it's been developed in Stanford University to work in the retina, and has been studied for about 5 or 6, 7 years. And it's essentially, the chip is made up of this tiny photovoltaic cell, which creates something called a pixel. And there's 378 of these pixels within the actual retinal chip. So how does the implant system work? Once again, it's a microchip, so that means it's very, very small. The idea is to put the chip inside part of the macula, essentially to replace the photoreceptors. So the photoreceptors are the light-sensitive cells within the retina and macula. And in geographic atrophy and macular degeneration, these photoreceptors have degenerated. So it's what's called an artificial retina. So this chip is then placed at the center of the macula to replace the photoreceptors that are no longer there. And as you know, age-related macular degeneration affects people mainly over the age of 60 onwards, and geographic atrophy itself, unfortunately, gets worse over time. Many studies have shown that the area of atrophy gets larger and larger over time, and the vision, unfortunately, deteriorates and gets worse. This slide here is once again showing the chip itself lying on this 1-cent coin, and it's very, very small. In fact, it's very small, but also very, very delicate and very thin. The chip itself is 30 microns in thickness, and you might wonder what 30 microns is. And if you took a human hair and measured the thickness of a human hair, it's roughly 60 to 80 microns. So the Prima chip is half the thickness of a human hair. So it's very, very thin as it sits in the macula. This slide is showing what happens normally as light enters the eye and how it's processed. And as you know, the light comes through the front of the eye, gets focused on the retina, and then there's electrical activity within the retina that sends signals down the optic nerve. And these signals then reach the brain, called the visual cortex. And this all happens instantaneously and allows vision. However, in age-related macular degeneration, because the photoreceptors have degenerated and are not functioning and are missing, as the light gets focused on the macula, unfortunately, the light is not being processed centrally. So there is no stimulus going to the brain from the central macula. Hence, there's this large area centrally, which is lacking vision and can often be distorted. This slide is showing ideally what the Prima microchip would do. And if you place the Prima microchip at the center of the macula, there's a special type of light which is projected inside the eye, which is projected across the surface of this microchip. And this microchip processes this light And then it also works with surrounding cells of the human retina. And then it helps to process the signals. And this signal is then passed down the optic nerve to the brain. So the Prima chip itself is one part of the system. And this slide is showing the whole system. So the whole system is made up of a pair of glasses. The glasses have a video camera over one of the lenses. The glasses are connected by a cable to a large pocket computer, a bit like a Walkman. And then the chip is inside the eye. So the chip is not connected to the glasses or the computer. And there's also a photograph there of one of the patients from France who's wearing the glasses with the microchip, the video camera over their eye. So essentially this bionic vision system has several components that allow the system to work. And this particular slide is just showing that once you put the glasses on, a patient that has the chip implanted in the macula, the whole system works simultaneously. So the video camera is capturing part of the visual world that is then projected from the video camera, passes down the cable to the pocket computer, and then the pocket computer then looks at the signals and refines the signals, optimizing them into something less noisy. That is then passed back to the glasses, which is then projected onto the onto the microchip. Those signals are then passed down the optic nerve to the brain. This slide is just highlighting the key features of the chip itself. So there's a photograph of a patient with macular degeneration who has geographic atrophy. The microchip placed at the center of the macula. It's showing the pixels and how the system works. And it's highlighting that, once again, an operation is required, but this operation is something which, sorry, I've just come off. To have come off. Yeah, I'm back on now, okay? So what this slide is just highlighting is that the operation that's required is a routine operation called a vitrectomy operation, which is used to implant the chip inside the eye. And it can be done under local anesthesia, and the chip itself is being designed specifically for patients with dry age-related macular degeneration. So you may ask, well, has this particular chip been used before? And yes, it has. I was involved with a study which is run in Paris by Dr. Lemaire and his team. And they were the first study of 5 patients to use this device. This slide is showing the types of patients that were involved with the study. Patients were over 60 years of age who had very advanced geographic atrophy. And the atrophy area, the size of the degeneration, is very large. It had to be at least 3 optic disc diameters large, which is about 5 millimeters. So it's quite a large area. And the vision in those patients was very poor. So the eye that was implanted had a vision that was essentially worse than counting fingers. So patients weren't really being able to read the Snellen chart that you see in your optometrist's room. This slide is showing a patient from the study itself who has a large area of atrophy on the across the macula. There's also an OCT scan showing how the central macula is very thin in this patient, and it's an ideal patient for this particular chip. So in France, 5 patients were successfully implanted. All the devices were working when they came back for follow-up after their operation. But that's just the first part of this particular technology. So once the patients are implanted with the Prima chip, they then undergo an intensive period of rehabilitation, which means that we have specialized trainers which help patients to understand their new vision. And they're taken through a series of tasks for them to get used to the device, used to the type of vision that they have. And then over time, the patients then are given the device to take home and use the device at home in their everyday life. And this is all tracked, is checked, there's support available. But obviously it's a big commitment because it's quite a specialized technology. And the patients really appreciate having all the support as part of the clinical trial. That particular trial did not show any complications related to the device itself. And the peripheral vision, as you know, in geographic atrophy, is always maintained. And this particular technology, these patients did not lose any of that peripheral vision. So these are some videos showing patients. So this is a bar that's been shown to a patient so they can orient themselves. And these are some letters being shown. So that video, sorry about the voice, it's all masked for the particular testimonial, but what that was showing was a patient with the device on had a video screen, and they were being presented with the word 6. And this is all part of the training. So they were using the camera in the goggles to scan the images, and they were able to recognize letters individually. We're then able to scan the word. And this is, again, some more videos from real life patients coming up shortly. You may ask also, well, what type of vision can this device really show patients? So historically, any retinal implants couldn't really give patients significant vision that they could really use in everyday life. So really the best was really hand motions vision. So as we know, for patients with geographic atrophy, the big thing is trying to recognize objects and letters and discriminate things in the central part of the field. So hand motion vision isn't that helpful. So that particular study showed that patients who had very poor vision, so worse than counting fingers vision in the implanted eye, were able to better that vision, could see better vision, and using special functionality of the actual device where you can zoom in on particular letters. The best patient could read up to 6/19, which is about halfway down a Snellen chart. So you can imagine the dramatic improvement that is potential with this particular chip. But obviously, this is a very, very small series of patients, but it's showing the real potential of this system that we've not really seen before. And this is why we're running the trial, which I'll come to later. Again, this slide is just showing the improvements in vision. This is a type of bar chart we use to show vision. And what it's showing is that all the patients have improved visual acuity in the actual trial, which was significant. Another slide here is showing the vision over 3 years of the study. And again, from someone who was seeing worse than counting fingers vision, they were able to improve the vision over the course of the trial. This is now another video of a patient looking at a particular chart of letters that we use in the study. And there's an arrow pointing 7 lines down the chart. So you imagine this particular patient couldn't see any of the letters on this chart. It was all blurred, very shadowy. But the patient is now able to use the system to read 6 lines down on this particular chart. It's in French, so he's reading out the letters on the particular line. So he's reading N and O, the letter Z, the letter C, and the letter D. So he's got all of the letters correctly identified 6 lines down on a particular chart. Whereas if he switches the device off, he can't see anything on that chart. This is another one again in French. So they're presenting words on a screen, and then the patient has to use the device to identify the letters. The letters in French is poisson, which is fish in English. So the patient's scanning the words with their video camera, and there's a picture here showing what they can see on the video camera. And then they're working at the beginning of the word, reading the letters P, O, I, S, O, N. So they read the word poisson. So that patient, as I said before, was unable to see anything at all on that screen and is now able to read a word. This is a patient now who's outside. We've taken them to an area where they can see a train timetable. So this is like an everyday type of assessment. So the patient's looking at a screen with lots of trains leaving the station in Paris, and they're trying to figure out what time the train's at. They're being asked, what time's the train to Rennes? And the patient's now looking for the train to Rennes on the screen. And then once they've found the particular train and identified the words, they're going to find out what time that train to Rennes is leaving at. It's leaving at 8:09, which was correct. So once again, it's just showing how patients previously on the trial are using the system in everyday life. This is now someone who is in front of a sign outside a hospital, and they have to then figure out what this sign is showing them. So there's something that says service social. So they're reading the word service. And so this patient essentially is scanning one of the titles on the sign and is reading the word service letter by letter, and now is moving on to the word social, so service social, so is now able to read that particular sign. So in summary, for that particular trial, as it was a first in human, which means it's the first trial that was ever done to test the safety of this system. And here I've just given a summary of the findings, which had been published several years ago. And what the study showed, importantly, was it was feasible, which means it is possible to put a chip in the center of the macula in a patient with geographic atrophy. That procedure itself does not do anything to the natural peripheral vision or affect the overall vision in the eye. All of the patients in that particular study were able to use the system. And in this small group of patients, the study was able to identify the best prosthetic visual acuity which has ever been recorded with the retinal implant technology. And more importantly for patients, and the questions were often asked, is that what can they actually see? And they were able to demonstrate that patients the majority were able to read letters and small words, and when they were outside in different lighting conditions, they were similarly being able to read words and small sentences. So finally, just moving on to what's happening at the moment for our patients. So this slide is just describing the Primavera trial that I'm involved with at Moorfields. So this is what's called a multi-center pivotal study. Multi-center as it's involving a number of sites across Europe. And pivotal is what's known in the pharma industry as a phase 3. So in medical devices, a pivotal trial means it's a trial that's being used to achieve a commercial license for the actual device. So it's a final step. The title of the study is Restoration of Central Vision with the Prima system in patients with atrophic age-related macular degeneration, which is open for recruitment at Moorfields. This particular study, here I'm just showing the entry criteria. So again, it's patients with very poor vision in an eye that's usually worse than counting fingers vision. It's a 3-year study. The total number of patients across Europe will be 38. We're looking for at least 5 patients in Moorfields to start with, and possibly more. And the chip itself, this slide is just describing the actual operation. So the operation to implant the chip is called a vitrectomy operation. So you may have heard about vitrectomy surgery. It's where we make some micro incisions on the eye and remove the jelly from inside the eye to access the retina or the macula to treat lots of conditions. It's a bit like having cataract surgery. Risks are very similar. The operation can be done under local anesthesia with sedation or general anesthesia. The operation on average takes about 2 hours. And there's a specific surgical technique which I've been trained in to carry out this particular procedure safely for patients. Once again, the criteria is patients over 60 who have a confirmed diagnosis of geographic atrophy due to age-related macular degeneration in both eyes. The study eye is usually the eye with the worst vision. So again, it should be worse than counting fingers. And when patients come into Moorfields, we test their vision over 3 days just to ensure that the vision that we're measuring is truly representative of what the patient can see. Other important aspects are when we look inside the eye, I'll be checking the area of atrophy to make sure it's large enough because the chip is of a certain size. So these are the sort of things which I'll be assessing. And of course, it's very important for our patients to commit to the study, which lasts 3 years, and attend the hospital as required. And finally, again, it's very, very important to realize this particular study, unfortunately, cannot have any signs of wet AMD. As I know many patients have this condition and also dry AMD, but if there's any history of wet AMD in either eye, those patients are not suitable for this particular trial. So once again, just in summary, the Primavera trial is open. It's using a microchip that's implanted in the central part of the eye in patients with geographic atrophy from macular degeneration. Once again, the chip is wireless. It works with a specialized pair of glasses and a pocket computer. Patients undergo surgery, which is day surgery, which lasts around 2 hours. And then afterwards, they undergo rehabilitation and training with our team at Moorfields, who have a long track record of working with implant technology and working with patients with low vision to help them use the device. So thank you very much again. Here is just some details of myself, my contact details, and my study coordinator, Camilla Mitchell, with her email address. So if anyone is interested in participating, they can contact Camilla and we can then open up that conversation. So thank you very much.
Mahi, thank you very much indeed. What an amazing piece of technology and astonishing surgical techniques for implanting it as well. So we have got a lot, that is just amazing. Let's just thank you. Emma has very helpfully put the address of Camilla Mitchell into the chat, c.mitchell@nhs.net, if anybody wants to contact them. Now, we'll come back to the repeat, I think, something about the inclusion criteria a bit later on, because it is very important that people understand who can and can't sign up for this trial. But a few questions have come in already. So let's just get crack on with some of these, because they're coming in very, very quick and fast. So a couple of people have asked about, and this might be jumping the gun a little bit, but can you implant multiple chips over time? Is that the plan over time, to increase the definition, or is it one chip? How many chips can be implanted? I remember with going back to there was an implant called the Argus machine, wasn't there, and something called the Argus 2, which implanted chips bigger than this, I think, into the eye. And one of the difficulties was that one chip didn't produce much usable vision, but the more chips that they implanted, the more heat was created, and that was the limiting factor, I think, the amount of definition that system could create. So how does your system overcome that?
Yeah, it's I mean obviously that is the right question to ask. The question has come up over the years. For this particular study, it's a single chip. That's what's been tested, that's what's been validated, and that's what all of the evidence has been based on. Of course, there's lots of scenarios where you can think about implanting multiple chips, the multi-chip, and there's a range of conditions in the future which perhaps could benefit from multi-chip systems. So certainly that has been a topic which has come up, but for this particular study, it's a single chip which is being tested. Yeah. So
it's not implausible or impossible to think that could be the case at some point in the future. Another question about the amount of time you mentioned, that when this happens in a functioning eye, then the time, it's instantaneous, isn't it? The processing from the light coming into the visual cortex, interpreting it, we see it as vision. That's an instantaneous process. Is it the same with this chip, or is there a lag between when the light arrives and when the brain works it out?
It's all instantaneous. So when the first time someone is putting the goggles on and the chip starts working, what then happens is, over a period of time, what they're seeing is then refined. So the computer is using algorithms which are refining the signals, and then the patient then starts to understand what the best signal is. So later, when they're putting it on, that more refined signal is reached much faster. So they don't have to keep doing that. It's just what's called tuning. So remember tuning a TV back in the day, or tuning a radio. You don't really have those anymore. You have to dial something. So once the patients are used to doing that, it's instantaneous what they can see. So the video camera picks up a more tuned image, and it is all instantaneous. There's no lag or anything. No.
It's astonishing. So what's the problem with patients with wet AMD? I mean, it's wonderful. Somebody points out, wonderful to have something for dry AMD, because there's so little, if anything, available. But why can't it be used in patients with wet AMD?
Yeah, so the problem with wet AMD is, you get growth of blood vessels which grow into the subretinal space. So between the choroid, the layer of blood vessels in the eye and the retina, and you get the blood vessels growing in there, you get scar tissue, which is left behind, and the retina itself starts getting damaged. So if you imagine trying to put a chip anywhere near that area, first of all, you could stimulate the process again, so the wet AMD could come back, and also there's a lot of mechanical distortion of the tissue and lots of barriers around it. So it's not really a safe thing to do. And unfortunately, if you have a history of wet AMD, what we see later it essentially becomes dry, but there is a large scar there. So you cannot physically put a chip there, and it's never been tested in that environment. So that's why patients are excluded. Yeah.
And somebody else has asked about the criteria, the age criteria for trial entry. Why have you started it at 60? What's the logic, the rationale for that?
I think when we design these particular studies, there are actually a couple of experts who are probably some of the world's most senior experts in age-related macular degeneration. We've got some colleagues in Germany, France, and the US. So they advise us on the population at risk, but also the chances of someone having advanced geographic atrophy according to their age. So really from 60 years onwards is where geographic atrophy starts to really affect vision. And every 5 years it advances and gets much larger. So if you pick someone who's a younger population, it may not be true age-related macular degeneration. It could be something what's called masquerading. So it looks like AMD, but it could be something genetic. So quite classically, when you look at large populational studies, that's the typical age group that we identified. Yeah.
And another question here, which is interesting, and the tests that were done to demonstrate the effectiveness of the implant were quite sort of functional. This question is about recognizing faces and sort of social interaction, and those things that people miss a great deal when they lose their central vision, don't they? Have you tried testing that to see whether that improves?
Yeah, so this was just a small selection of some of the tests that are done. So during the study, as patients become much more familiar with using the system, they then are the system is assessed in lots of different environments, and one of the most important things is really things you do in your daily life. So absolutely looking at faces, objects, outlines, things on a table, all of those things are done. So I don't have those. I've got videos of that, but we just wanted to first of all show sort of more high definition, functional things like reading. Which is one of the main things. So yeah, but that is tested. Yeah.
It's unequivocal. You can read the word 6, or you can't read the word 6. It's kind of unarguable, isn't it? I guess really is quite clear cut. Another question here, and this is interesting, of the patients who've been tested with this, and I can understand why, have very poor vision indeed. Is this likely ever to be useful earlier on in the disease process before such dramatic and extreme loss of vision occurs? Can you foresee that at any point?
Yes. Yeah, so if you take a step back to when it was developed in Stanford, what they did is they had different models that they implanted the chips in, and then they use certain electrical tests to try and estimate what the actual visual acuity is of the chip. They then work out what the potential vision this chip could give. And in the lab, they were able to propose a certain level of vision that the chip could give. So at that point, it was kind of just off the top letter of the chart. So when you're designing this trial, you wouldn't want to put that chip in someone with much better vision because you didn't feel that you could really improve their vision. However, now we're finding in this particular study, maybe the vision is a lot better using the whole system, which we never knew before. So perhaps in the future, you could look at levels of vision which are not as severely affected. So yes, I mean, this is the first big trial of the device, and this is where we'll get all their information. So absolutely, yeah.
And presumably, although you're trying it in dry AMD, there are lots of other conditions that are similar to dry AMD. In other words, they don't cause the same distortion and damage to the retina that somebody with wet AMD might have. So is it conceivable that it could be used for other conditions over time?
Absolutely. I mean, we actually looked into retinitis pigmentosa. We looked to get funding for that particular trial because we did certainly feel that is a huge unmet need. So that is one particular area that's on the radar. Other areas which are affect the macula in a very particular way are things like Stargardt disease. Again, so there are obviously a range of conditions that potentially could benefit. So yeah.
Just a couple of people have asked for a bit more of an explanation about what geographic atrophy is. Is it dry AMD? And it is really, it's the technical term, isn't it? Perhaps you could just say a bit more about that.
Yeah, so this dry wet distinction is really on the appearance of what you see in the eye. So something that's wet is known as wet because it has fluid or blood, which are both liquids at the back of the eye. So wet AMD is where blood vessels are growing in the back of the eye, and then it's causing fluid and blood to leak inside the macula, and that's how that name wet has come about. And then when you look at a particular scan of the eye, such as an OCT scan, you see this fluid inside the retina. So the retina itself looks very wet because it's full of blood or fluids. So then if you move to dry AMD, so dry AMD has things such as drusen, which are those yellowish deposits at the back of the eye. And over time, the drusen can increase in number, it can increase in size, and then you get changes in other layers of the retina where you have more pigment appearing. And then what happens is as these deposits enlarge, parts of the center of the macula start to disappear, which is called atrophy. So the photoreceptors start to disappear and degenerate, but there's no fluids, there's no bleeding. It's just slowly disappearing, and that's where the dry comes from. So geographic atrophy is the very advanced form of dry. So when people say, oh, you've got some dry AMD, it may mean you have some drusen or some changes, some pigment changes. But then later in dry AMD, you have this atrophy with the center. It's a bit like a picture of the globe. We have all the countries around the world. That's where geographic comes from, where large patches start going missing. And unfortunately, they all join up and then involve the center in the majority of patients. Yeah.
And of course, people will be looking to this with great optimism because there is no treatment yet, is there, for any form of dry AMD, of geographic atrophy. There are things in the pipeline, but nothing that's actually been shown to be a real blockbuster.
Yeah, I mean, I think some drugs were tried, but unfortunately didn't work. But those drugs were not really looking at restoring vision. It was trying to slow down the condition. And many of the new therapies that are being looked at are trying to just slow everything down. So they will look at patients with all types of vision to try and slow down what's called the natural history. The natural history is what happens in an eye when you do nothing and just watch it over time. So yeah, you're right. There isn't anything I'm aware of which would restore vision in the area of atrophy. Yeah.
So somebody remarked that, of course, Moorfields is a big centre for stem cell work, and there is work going on, isn't there? We've heard in the past from Pete Coffey and people like that, and Lyndon de Cruz, about the work that they've been doing with stem cells. That also aims to turn to reverse sight loss, doesn't it? In the end, or at least prevent progression. Perhaps not slow it down, but prevent progression as the next step forward. So, you know, stem cell and gene therapy and drug therapy are all very exciting, but actually, if technology can solve the problem as effectively, then that's another route that hasn't perhaps been explored quite as much in the past in terms of macular disease.
Yeah, I think you're right, because I mean, I certainly know about the stem cell work my colleague Lyndon de Cruz is doing. That's obviously at a very early stage, identifying if the actual system actually works in certain conditions. So that's a kind of early phase work. But yeah, I think one of the issues is that patients of a certain age, when they've really lost the ability to see, how long do they really want to wait Are they able to tolerate just slowing down of the disease? But the answer is no. I mean, often people just want to restore some vision for quality of life purposes. So this is where this particular technology has value. But I would say also that all these other therapies have great value at different stages of disease. So they'll all have a role in different types of patients, I think, in the future. So you'll be able to have a patient in front of you, and then you'll be able to signpost them to, this might be suitable stem cell therapy, gene therapy may be the best for you, or perhaps have you thought about a medical device such as a retinal chip? So I think they're working on all the different aspects of the population. And I think that's what most kind of promising thing is for patients, is that it isn't just a specific area, there'll be a range of options available. Yeah.
Yeah, because yes, and I think that one of the reasons why some of the drug therapies for dry AMD haven't worked in the past is that they've tried to treat all the patients with one drug, and that obviously isn't going to work anymore. We now understand why that doesn't work for people, because everybody's disease is slightly different according to their genetic makeup and so on. So and we want as many shots on the goal as possible, don't we? We want to have as many options available as we possibly can. Just going back to the trial itself, a question has come in again, just going back to the tests, and you may have said this and I missed it, but when you were doing tests to see how effective the implant was, were you able to do, the person puts it like sort of functional activities? So I guess this means things like boiling a kettle or baking a cake, or not driving. I think that would be probably a bit optimistic at the moment. But were they doing, did you test them doing actual tasks and daily activities at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So a daily activity will be broken up into different steps. You wouldn't expect someone just to launch into doing all aspects of a particular task, because it requires quite a lot of understanding of the visual scene. But no, tasks, for example, on a table, for example, if you're sitting down to have dinner, you break that up into different aspects for you to then navigate around a table to see different aspects of it. If you're outdoors, for example, they would break up walking into, aware of your visual scene, what's happening down below. So you have to kind of break up the task, and they have different mobility experts that can be brought in to help with that. So, but yeah.
And another question about you, we talked about the lower age limit of 60. Is there an upper age limit for this trial?
No, not upper age, no.
So the patient that you've in the UK, in London, that you've done this implant on, she was, I think, in her late 80s. I said 88 earlier. Was that right? Had I got that right?
That's correct. She was 88. And I think the way to look at it is, I met quite a number of these patients now coming through Moorfields, and people just want to have some added quality of vision now. I think I don't even look at the age, to be quite honest with you. They come in and I'm assessing everything, and then assessing medical conditions, ability to be on a trial. There's also expectations as well. But it's not like we're screening out when they're coming in at the moment, that is. Yeah.
And the rehabilitation period, so after the implant, I guess you're training the patient and the patient's brain how to respond and react to this, and that's quite a long process. Did I see on the slide you said it was 3 years, the rehab?
Yes, so the trial runs for 3 years, but
right.
The patients come in each week for roughly about half a day, so about 4 hours. And that 4 hours is spent with the team of low vision trainers, and they just work through different tasks. So one day they may just be orientating themselves with how to use the system, and then later on, and as they become more experienced, they'll then work more difficult tasks. So they come in each week, but then as the trial moves on, that frequency will become less because people will be using it at home. So in year 2 and year 3, they're not going to be coming in every week, but it's always available. We're always available to offer additional support. So, yeah.
The glasses didn't look particularly cumbersome. Some of these wearable devices that are in development are quite big, and they look like great big sort of, virtual reality goggles and things. These just look like an ordinary pair of glasses with a little camera in front of the eye that's being that's being used for the trial, I guess. They don't look all that uncomfortable. Are patients comfortable wearing them?
Yeah, so they're specifically designed for someone. So that's something which is measured and to ensure it's comfortable and it's bespoke for that particular patient. Yeah.
So the patient who you implanted with this, how's she doing?
Yeah, she's fine. I mean, I can't go too much into the details of how she is generally, but there's been no issues at all with her eye that I'm aware of. I've seen her, and yeah, so she's coming up in the trial at the moment, and yeah, she's absolutely fine.
So, how many more patients then are you looking for? What's the next step for this trial?
So I'm looking for reaching a target of 5 patients. We have patients coming in every week for assessments. And then if we get to 5, we'll probably keep going higher, depending on how the recruitment's going around Europe. But certainly we have a lot of interest. We have people coming through, people waiting to come on to be implanted as well. So yeah.
So when you get to that goes on for three years, and then what happens?
So generally what happens with a lot of these trials is they have what's called a follow-up study as well. So what's called a post-market study. So they'll then have an extension in the future that we hope. So it all depends on the commercialization, which is the marketing of the device. And then patients remain in the system and they'll be under my care at Murfield as well. So, yeah.
So, I mean, often with drugs, it takes 12, 15, 18, 20 years to bring something. This technology can move a bit faster, is that right? It can be sometimes a bit quicker than biomedical research and drug therapy.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you have a particular condition which there's absolutely nothing available for, the NHS England, the regulatory authorities are certainly looking at it as a potential kind of specialized treatment for patients. And historically, they have opened the door for retinal implant devices in untreatable retinal conditions. So we think certainly that it won't be a very slow process. That will start during the trial. So hopefully by the end of the trial, we'll have some information on that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it is a slightly different process. So is this likely to be affordable as technology, do you think?
Well, I think looking at all of the new therapies that are coming along, which are very, very expensive to develop, take years of research. I think when they come into the NHS market, what we'll probably be unaware of is that of the probably what I'd say is that the financial reconsiderations to make it affordable. I think the company is certainly looking to make it accessible for health markets around the world. So I wouldn't say compared to something like, for example, gene therapy, which the published cost is over $500,000, but we don't really know how much it costs the NHS, but it's now widely available for particular patients. So that's something which is a lot more expensive, probably 5-6 times as expensive, is now available for NHS patients. So I don't think that's going to be a barrier at all, actually, to be honest with you. This is a far less expensive intervention. So I think that will be something that will be assessed in the normal way through NICE and all the regulatory authorities.
The National Institute for Health and Care Excellence.
That's correct, yeah.
Do the evaluations in terms of whether the NHS should pay for something or not. Somebody points out that COVID jabs went through in less than a year. We can do this faster if we really, really want to, I guess is the point there.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to medical devices, these companies are already in contact with regulatory authorities. So when you contact the MHRA, one of the things you have to think about is pipeline projects, and then you're already talking to the next group of people. So they're aware of what's required to take devices to the market. So that's how the trials are designed, so that there aren't any gaps. And all the information that a particular regulatory authority wants to see, they know that will become available during the trial. So once they start having that data and that information, then that will hopefully start to satisfy the regulatory authorities. So that's why there isn't this huge delay, because there's a lot of thinking that's going on well before the design of the trial. Yeah.
So where do you see this going down the line? What's your kind of hope for this sort of technology and your dream down? I mean, where's the possibility for this, do you think?
Well, I think I have worked on another retinal implant for retinitis pigmentosa, where the surgery was very complex. I mean, it was taking me 4 to 5 hours to do that particular operation. I was doing that in several patients. And if you think about a vitreoretinal surgeon in an eye unit who's possibly thinking about doing that operation, they're unlikely to spend 4 or 5 hours. You couldn't really justify that in the NHS. This particular operation, however, is much more scalable, which means you could actually introduce this to a large number of eye units across the country, because the operation itself, certainly any vitreoretinal surgeon could be trained in technique. They have the patients. The low vision trainers are essentially optometrists or even technicians that you can train. So they have the infrastructure. There isn't as if you need something new in an eye department. So for relative size of an eye department, you could quite easily introduce this particular treatment. So I think that once things get moving, you could, because I've had a lot of colleagues around the country who are very interested in joining the trial, but the trial was just based at Moorfields, this particular one. So there is certainly lots of areas in the country that I'm aware of that would be certainly very keen to have this particular system. And I've had people from around the country trying to come down to London and asking if it's available locally, but hopefully the future would be. Yeah, and you have excellent surgeons all across the country now, so certainly is scalable. Yeah,
that's fantastic. So just to recap, then, you're looking for a handful of patients, but they are probably going to be in the London area because you need to see them at least in the first year every week. So the travel distances are a bit prohibitive for people from other parts of the country.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly say that, I mean, I had someone who came down 100 miles, which was absolutely fine. They were very happy to come down. We don't have a complete barrier, but it's something they have to think about, reflect on before wanting to come down to Moorfields. Yeah.
So I think on our website, you will be able to find, and I'm just going to ask Emma, who's in the background, whether she can very quickly find the link to the page on our website where we have a set of frequently asked questions about this trial. I don't know whether Emma can do that, magic that out of thin air, but it's on our website anyway, so you can go there and look at the frequently asked questions. Emma has put Camilla's email address in the chat if you want to follow that up. But overall, what proportion do you think of dry AMD patients might find this useful in time? Is this something for a handful of patients, or
well, the difficulty is, Kathy, is that unfortunately, dry age-related macular degeneration, many of those patients are not in our services at the moment. That's one of the big things. So they no longer come to the clinics. So I think there's a kind of underestimate of the number of people that have it. That's the issue. And they're often in low vision services or in the community. So there's probably a much larger number of patients out there that could benefit. But we're only seeing the ones that are coming through patient associations or through other colleagues. So I think there's probably a much larger population out there that could benefit. That's the whole thing, and trying to bring those patients back in is going to take some work through like associations like yourself. So yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. I think we are out of time, Mahi, but thank you so much for a wonderful talk. And as so many people have said how encouraging it is to see this technology coming through for people with dry AMD. I cannot thank you enough for your time this evening. It's just been lovely. Thank you so much. Don't forget that if you missed any of this, or you know somebody who you think might like to see this, we have recorded it, it will be on our website in a little while. So please go and have a look, or send somebody to that if you think they will enjoy it. Next month, our talk will be on Tuesday, the 19th of April at 7 o'clock, and we'll be talking about one of our research projects that has recently just finished, that we've been funding recently. So I hope you'll join us for that. Mahi, once again, thank you very much indeed for your time, your expertise, and a great talk. I'm very grateful to you. Thank you all for attending again this evening, and I hope to see you next month. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Good night.